So up to this point, we focused on the Eastern Hemisphere. All right, we've mainly looked at different points of Asia, whether it be East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, or the Middle East, which is also Central Asia. Now it's time to shift our focus to the Western Hemisphere. So when we look at the trading trends of the Western Hemisphere, all right, we get somewhat of a visual of some of the earliest civilizations that were, west of the Atlantic Ocean, east of the Pacific Ocean. And we do see that there was no series of hemispheric interactions like in Afro-Eurasia. The llama and the potato, all right, we'll see that the llama was pretty much the main domesticated animal along the Andes Mountains in what's now South America, and the potato was a very prominent crop. But the llama and potato never actually made it to Mesoamerica. And the Maya, centered in the Yucatan Peninsula, had a type of writing that simply never diffused to other areas. And even within Mesoamerica, the Mexica civilization didn't really have contact with the Inca. There were few pack animals. We know that there were no wheels and no large ocean-going vessels. So the networks really are a little more regional. Plus the varying terrain, all right? When you're looking at a north-south axis, there's going to be all types of different climates. The terrain made such contact difficult. The rainforests that are on the isthmus here in modern-day Panama really limited contact between north and south. And again, this orientation leads to differences that are hard to overcome. Within Afro-Eurasia, we'll see that most of the trade routes did, there was some north-south interaction, but it was mainly east-west, which meant that travelers are dealing with similar conditions. Religion also did not diffuse in the Western Hemisphere like it did in Afro-Eurasia. We do find that maize, you might say corn, but maize eventually makes its way into South America and parts of North America. The spread of pottery and architectural styles, so that's where ideas are, ideas of architecture. It proves that maybe there was indirect contact over long distances, and the presence of the sweet potato in Oceania, so that's to say areas around Australia, proves that there might have been some contact between South America and Oceania, although there is a theory that the seeds, so to speak, simply floated across the open water. So there's some discrepancies there. One of the great civilizations in North America, which you can see an artist reenactment of, is Cahokia, and it's near present-day St. Louis, Missouri. Cahokia is prominent from about 900 to 1250. This city was at the convergence of the Mississippi, Illinois, and Missouri rivers, hence why St. Louis is located where it is. Now, it's the center of regional trade. We say it's regional North American trade because archaeology tells us that there are shells from the Atlantic Ocean that made its way here. There's copper from Lake Superior, buffalo hides from the Great Plains, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, and even mica, a shiny mineral from the Appalachian region. At its peak, there were about 25,000 people. And you kind of get an idea here of the varying mounds. Ceremonial mounds like this can be found all throughout the state of Wisconsin. So North American-wise, the Cahokia ruins, as well as the general Mississippian culture that they were a part of, were one of the more prominent civilizations. Now, often, when we talk about the Western Hemisphere prior to contact meaning Europeans showed up, you have the big three. We have the Maya, the Mexica, and the Inca. For the rest of this particular video, we're going to focus solely on the Maya. Now, what we refer to as Mayan civilization was at its peak from 250 to 910, so before the time frame of which our unit officially begins. And we know this because this is the time frame when there are writings on the monuments. So the map gives you somewhat of an idea of where they were located. The modern-day Yucatan Peninsula. So we got parts of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, all located within this particular culture. Now the Maya used glyphs, kind of like how the Egyptian used glyphs, but they were so pictorial that few really thought that they could represent actual sounds. It wasn't until the 1970s that a true breakthrough occurred, and as of now, we've deciphered about 85% of all Maya script. Now bear in mind that there was no Maya empire to speak of. Right? We just have a collection of independent city-states that have a common language and culture, and from time to time, they would gather for religious purposes. So that's where the fragmentation comes into play. The Maya government was run by a sole ruler. So the city-state is run by a ruler who's also commander of the army. His death would mean that a council of elders would determine whether his male heir was fit to rule. And if there was no heir, the council of elders is just going to select a new leader, whoever they think is the best. Now, just under the ruling family are the nobles, who lived in some of the largest houses in the Maya city-states. And from the highest ranks of the nobles, one can become a scribe. And they were special, because even though there were glyphs within Mayan civilization, reading and writing was not something that was widespread within Maya culture. So they were known for their skills of reading and writing, and that's why during warfare, they were often valued as prisoners. So next came the merchants, who would specialize in a little bit more of that regional trade. And we know that salt was imported from the Yucatan beaches, and items like jade and shells were also traded. Skilled craftsmen, right? We see craftsmen. They would take raw materials and turn them into something. So we're kind of going on down the line here. At the top's the ruler, then nobles, scribes, merchants, craftsmen. Farmers outside the city centers would provide food to the urban residents. And since there were really no domesticated animals amongst the Maya, land that was cultivated was at most a day or two's walk from any urban center. Now slaves would do the bulk of the actual agricultural work, and they were often prisoners of war. That's a continuity that really stands out amongst these great civilizations of the Western Hemisphere. Use of prisoners of war as slaves. Now, each of these civilizations has city centers. Tikal is one of the main city centers, and it was a meeting place for really all of the Maya city-states for important astronomical and religious dates. Full time, there were about 40 to 50,000 residents in the city proper, and another 50,000 lived in the countryside surrounding it. And remember, this was highly unusual for the Western Hemisphere to have a city this big at this time. Now, what the Maya are most remembered for? Cultural achievements. So scribes developed and worked with an advanced mathematical system that actually involved conceiving of the number 0. And they were really the first to use this idea of 0. They represented 0 with a symbol so they could manipulate large numbers, they could create calendars using it, and they eventually were able, with architecture, to plan and construct large buildings, some of which we just saw in the image of Tikal. Now the temples, pyramids, palaces, these public plazas, they were created without metal tools. They used obsidian tools and a flint-like rock called chert. When it comes to astronomy, second to none, the Maya were really some of the best in the world at this time. They could plot planetary cycles and predict lunar and solar eclipses. Religiously speaking, they were polytheistic, and their worldview held that the gods made people out of maize and water. Human blood sacrifice kept the gods happy, and agriculture agriculture plentiful. So blood offerings, bloodletting, played a key role in their society. Animals, slaves, prisoners of war, even children were sacrificed on important dates and as offerings to the gods. Some part of the body would be pierced, and we can kind of get an idea here. Blood would drip down a rope into a bowl before being offered up to the gods. And this is why in warfare, the primary goal is to capture prisoners of war. All right, they want to obtain live captives. Now, any great civilization will fall. And we believe the rapid collapse began in the century after a long-term drought began in about the year 840. The population will drop by at least 85%. And as is the case with any civilization, elements of the culture will survive, but not the great cities. It really varies. Reasons vary as to why they collapse. There's lots of speculation. There's the belief that extremely rapid population growth after the year 600 outstripped available resources. All of this political disunity between the city-states and all these rivalries really prevented a coordinated response to this lack of resources, to this climactic catastrophe, and warfare became more frequent. We do know that the collapse was sudden. It was extremely sudden because site after site features monuments that have engravings or carvings, and then they're abandoned. Some only have one stone face that's carved. And when you add up all of these different city-states, population is probably about 8 to 10 million at its peak. So when we look at the Western Hemisphere, we can see that trading was mainly regional, and that the Maya are one of the first, we might say, great large-scale civilizations of the West.